Hello guys, welcome back to the fourth devlog. And as you can see, there have been quite a couple of changes in my game. Yes, I know there's a lot of experimentation going on, but you need to find something that works properly across all the features that you want, you know. So it happens many times during development. A few things change here and there. Well, in my case, the entire orientation has changed. But apart from that, you can see on the screen right now that I have this thing called shots and then I have this thing called high score. Okay, so obviously I have implemented a score system and a high score system in this game. And also I have implemented the infinite spawning mode or endless spawning mode, whatever you want to call it. So let's take a look at the gameplay first and then we'll go through the different things. And as you can see, it pops up right here. Enemy animation is playing well. The score is 1. Now I'll jump. As you can see, the jump and shoot buttons disappear when the player is jumping. That's just to stop the players from spamming these buttons, Okay. Now I will stop play mode, and when I enter inside again, you'll see high score is 3. Very well. So now let's take a look at some of the changes that have happened. Sorry for the fan noise if you can hear it. I'm going to try my best to cut that out. But if you can still hear it, I apologize. My laptop's blowing up right now. Anyway, this is the normal canvas. So I have this thing called Game Manager. Yes, let's talk about the score system first. Score text, high score text, pretty usual stuff. These are just text mesh pros, and I've edited them, of course. As you can see, I may or may not change the font later. Going to Visual Studio, I have this class called Game Manager, taking a reference to our score text and high score text. And this is where you store the actual score and the high score. This is just for displaying the TextMesh Pro UGUI. That's just for displaying. You need to do the actual logic as well, right? So let's go through the score system first, and then we'll go through the high score system. So first we have this method called public static void increase score. Now this is static because I don't want to create references to my game manager class just to call a single method. If you don't understand what static is, I've made a video on that, so please check it out. Moving on. So if enemy controller dot has enemy been shot, score ++, and we print the score to the console. You may have noticed that in the console at the bottom left corner of the screen. Okay, so let's take a look at what this is. I'm going to press Control and click, and there we get a reference right here. So as you can see, this is my enemy controller class, and yes, this is an updated version of Visual Studio 2019. Public static bool. So this is a property. I have discussed properties earlier, so you're more than welcome to check out my earlier devlogs. Get private set. And what happens with this property? Let's check out the rest. Okay, so when a bullet collides with the game object of the enemy, has enemy been shot equals true. Okay, any other references? I don't think so. Yep. Let's close that. So this method gets set to true every time an enemy gets shot, which is what we want, right? Every time you hit an enemy, you want the score to increase. So that's a simple increment operator. I have a video on increment operators as well, and other operators in general. You can check that out. Okay, but that's it. So where do we call this method? Oh yes, the return keyword. Before discussing that, the return keyword. Very important. We don't want the score to keep increasing for some reason. We only want the score to increase if, and only if, the enemy has been shot. And for that, as soon as we break out of the if loop, I am returning the control back, or giving the control back. Okay? Now this would make sense when you see where I have called this method. So moving on to that now. This method, this is only the definition of this method increase score. Where has it been called? Tell me, where does it make sense to call this method? Well, the answer to that is of course in the enemy controller class, but it's not where you think it is. See, I haven't called it when the bullet hits our enemy. The reason being, if you fire twice and both bullets hit the enemy before the enemy is destroyed, then that would equate to a score of 2, which doesn't make sense. How do you score 2 points just because you had 2 bullets? Which is why I did not call that method over here. What I did was I called it at the place where I'm destroying the enemy. And that is right here. And as you can see, because of the static keyword, I don't have to create references to my game manager class. Which is why I love using static, by the way. Okay, so right before I destroy the game object that's enemy, I am calling my increase score method. Okay, well done. So now we have increased the score, but now we want to put it on the screen for our players to see. Because the player does not have access to the console. It is an internal component of Unity. And even if you figure out some way of giving access to the console, it does not really look good. There's something called UI and visual elements. You need to keep track of that. So for that, I have this method called display score. What it's simply doing is shots plus the score dot toString. Now this toString is a typecasting method. So you might have noticed that the score variable is actually int. So if I place my cursor on score, you'll see the tooltip, it says int score, right? So what I want to do is, or what I am doing rather, is typecasting it to string so that it doesn't have any problems being displayed on the screen, because this is, after all, a string, right? And it's usually a good idea to typecast your integers, especially if you want to put them on some sort of a display, so that you don't get any weird errors. And what we do with this display score is we simply call it in the update method, so that it keeps checking. There's the score. Now let's discuss the high score. All right, so private float high score. What we need to do here is have one method called private void check for high score. Now, you may feel that I'm going up and down a little bit, but this is how you're supposed to do it. Private void check for high score. Obviously, if our score is greater than the high score, then we need to set the high score to equal the score. That's what we're doing, right? Every time we increase the score, if that increased score is greater than the high score, then the high score has to equal to the score. That's the logic behind it. And I'm using PlayerPrefs. It's a very simple Unity method for storing data. Not very secure, but I'm not concerned with security, especially with the high score of this game. But if you want to do some more things or want to achieve some advanced features, you are going to have to use better ways of storing data. But since this is only high score and this is a casual game, PlayerPrefs is extremely simple. All you have to do is call the setFloat method. Let's see what the tooltip tells us. Sets the value of the preference identified by key. So the string is the key and the float is the value. So you use this key to store and identify whatever you're storing, right? This is the key which will be used, high score. And the second parameter is the thing that you want to store. So we want to store the high score, right? Right after the high score has equated the score. Okay. Of course, we want to display the high score as well. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense. So it's the exact same thing what we did with the score. Now, where do we use this? Here we have this thing called setFloat, but we also need to getFloat. We put that in the start, so every time the game starts, or every time the start method is called, which is before the first frame update, you need to do this, PlayerPrefs.getFloat. Yes, using the same key again, and you can just pass in 0, you don't need to pass in anything else, and it works totally fine. And then we call the display high score method as well, because we want this high score to be displayed at the beginning of the game. And we call the display high score method once again in the update method, so that every time it gets updated, you will get a live feedback. If you don't do this, it's totally fine. Maybe you only want the high score to be displayed at the end of the game or at the beginning of the game or at some certain stages. So in that case, you may have a different implementation. But if you want the high score to update along with the score, then you need to call the display high score method or your version of the display high score method in the update method. Okay, so that was about the score system and the high score system. But we also have, which you may have noticed, of course you noticed, is the main element of the game. Infinite spawning. So let's take a look at that now. Let me collapse that. And for that, I have this tile manager thing. Let's take a look at the script tile manager. We've got it here, neatly arranged. Okay, so all the ground prefabs that I require are being stored in an array. If you don't know what an array is, I have a video of that. Feel free to check it out. It'll be linked in the card above. So I've even put a tooltip, the ground prefabs that needs to be spawned. Putting them in an array is very simple and actually much, much better. I don't want to have, multiple variables to store my prefabs. In my case, I only have 3 prefabs, but you may have, 10 or 50. In other applications, maybe you have 100. Are you going to keep creating 100 variables? No, it does not make any sense at all. So you create a very small and simple thing called array, a data structure. This is where we're storing the prefabs actually. You may have noticed that as well. To store the position of the player, that's just, we want to keep track of where the player is moving, and based on the player's movements, we want to keep spawning the prefabs up ahead, right? Private float safe zone. So the destruction of the tiles is done properly without introducing bugs. See, when you keep spawning new tiles in front of the player, you need to destroy the tiles which are behind the player, because if you don't do that, then your game is going to crash eventually because of some memory error. Because you'll have infinite tiles, right? So you need to destroy whatever is not on the screen. And having a safe zone just simply destroys the tiles when they are not on the screen. So this involves a lot of trial and error. And I've got this number boiled down to 5.0f after a lot of trial and error, like I said. Otherwise, it doesn't look good when the tile is being destroyed when it is on the screen. Okay, spawn X. To know where the X-axis to spawn. To know where on the X-axis to spawn the ground prefabs. because the y and z axis are always going to be constant. Okay, there's a spelling. There's a typo. Okay. In this game, we're always moving sideways, so that's the x-axis, right? The y and the z-axis are always going to be constant, so we don't need to manipulate them. Private float prefab length to provide the offset for the spawning, because, this is the actual length of the ground prefab, so that they get spawned right one after the other. Not in between, not apart. Amount of prefabs on screen, that's how many of the ground prefabs should be spawned at a time. How many do you want? In my case, it's just 3. This also matters on what type of ground prefabs you're using or what type of prefabs you're using. I only have basic shapes, so it's perfectly normal, but if you have some more advanced and high-level resolutions and shaders, you may want to keep this at a small number if you don't want to introduce errors or limit your application or game to higher graphical capabilities. Okay, last prefab index, that's 0, so that's the first prefab that we spawn is always the normal one. I don't want to start the game with the enemy right there or the fire right there. We're using a list to keep track of all the active prefabs. Now, I am going to make a video on list in the future, so you can be subscribed and hit the bell icon to be notified when I do that. Stay tuned. Alright, so this is where it actually starts. Now the thing is, I have explained all the variables and why we need them, but I'm not going to explain all of these things. Do you know why? Because I referred to another video right here on YouTube, and I will link that video down below and you can check that out. It's pretty awesome. Hopefully you will understand that. And just like that, we have the basic elements of our game all put together and working. Let's give it one more shot. Animation systems are playing well. There was again a lot of trial and error in that. Trying to switch the animation states at the perfect time. The fire looks a little bit awkward, so that is something that I definitely want to fix. Particle effects working fine. Let's see what happens when the player dies. Okay. Oh, the enemy starts laughing. Good. I saw some inconsistencies over there, which I will fix. Okay, that's been it for this video. If you made it this far, thank you very much. I really appreciate it. If you liked the video, hit the like button. If you like my channel or if you like the stuff that I'm putting out, hit the subs button and the bell icon to be notified when I make my next video. And I'm going to continue making these dev vlogs until this project has been launched to the Play Store. But anyway, thanks for listening to me blabber on about my project. That's been it from me. Thank you very much once again. Have a good day / good night.